Thanks for coming. This is Kivanc, and I work at ZipRecruiter, and I will present a brief history of timekeeping. In case you didn't know, today is actually the summer solstice, longest day. So why do I present about timekeeping? It's not that I'm an expert. It all started with, I was parsing this message board, and every single message on the message board has a time in it. And my CPAM module would convert the messages into some structured data, and times would go into datetime objects. And it was all working fine until I got this error message. So this error message happens when you're initializing a datetime object with a time that never existed, which only happens when you're trying to initialize a datetime object with a spring forward clock. So that time never existed, and you're getting an email local time error. This error message is actually pretty cool. I wanted to name my slides after that. But I questioned why do we need daylight saving, and I also had a couple more questions related to times. Having grown up in a country where we had 24 hours, 12 a.m. to 12 p.m. was always confusing because 12 is noon, not before noon, not afternoon, whatever. And the accuracy we have in time was always amazing to me. I was wondering if there's any alternative ways to represent the clock. And what's the time in space? What's the time in International Space Station? What's the time we use in Curiosity rover in Mars, etc. So all those questions made me go look up, and I wrote a brief history of timekeeping. And by brief, what I mean is I'm going to skip a lot of things. I'll just give you a couple points. And it will be actually...
Testing. Testing. I don't really know what I'm doing. Okay. I don't know if let's hold on.
Sound check. Can you hear me? Okay. Sound check. Sound check. 1, 2. Maybe I should get closer to. I don't know.
It's awkward.
Yeah, but it's okay. All right. How about, well, sound check. 1, 2. I can hold it.
It's gonna brother once you're lanyard. If you put the lanyard.
Like this?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we can't hear you, so I think that'll work.
Can you hear me? Nice. Forget everything I said. We'll start over. Oops. Can I start now? Okay, perfect. Okay, let's start over. Thanks for coming. This is Kivanc. I'm working at ZipRecruiter, and I will present to you a brief history of timekeeping. And in case you already forgot what I said, today is actually summer solstice, longest day, which is kind of related, so I wanted to share. Why do I wanted to present about timekeeping is a problem I had with this message board I was parsing. So in this message board, as everywhere else, I figure there are times of posts, and then my CPAM module would parse it and convert it to some structured data, and times would go into datetime objects. So what went wrong there was I run into this error message, which implied that I was passing some times to datetime that never existed before, which means that those were spring forward, and message board didn't actually attribute to spring forward, which kind of sucks. But it made me question, it made me question why do we need data saving? And I also had some questions about times already, like, well, which one is noon? And how can we have so accurate clocks and in sync with everyone else's clocks? Is there any alternative ways to represent clock? What's the time and space, et cetera, et cetera? Hence the brief history of timekeeping. Brief here means that I'm going to skip a lot of things. I will only present a couple points that I thought are most important, but feel free to chip in and say this is not important, or I know something that is more important. A more accurate title would have been a brief chronological history of timekeeping, because I will start from the very beginning with the Big Bang. So 13.7 billion years ago, what happened has created what we have now. And for me, it's kind of hard to imagine how big a number 13.7 billion is in terms of years, because we don't usually deal with years that big. So I saw this joke on Hacker News last week when Amazon is set to acquire Whole Foods for exactly the same number, but dollars. They said that's $1 for every year since the Big Bang. So it's easier to imagine that way. If you think about $1 as 1 year, that's the amount of years that we had since the Big Bang, which is quite a lot. But first 8 to 9 billion years, there's no sun. And first 500,000 years of the sun, there's no Earth. And first 13 million years of Earth, there's no moon. So we know our Earth is 4.5 billion years old, which is still quite a lot. I think $4.5 billion. And this high-resolution graph is showing you the last billion years of Earth. On x-axis, you're seeing the millions of years and difference in hours. So this was one thing I encountered I did not know before. If you go back 1 billion years, a day was 18 hours. It was not 24 hours, and it grew almost linearly. So what we have now is 24 hours, but it was not always. It was never 24 hours, actually. And in case you're curious, this is where dinosaurs lived, between 200 and 250-ish million years ago. So they never got to experience 24-hour day. And we come into play as late as 200,000 years ago. So if you put it on the graph, it looks like this. There's a red line on the very left that is hard to see. That's us. So if you think about it, humans are very new to this whole Earth thing. And it's not difficult to guess that humans or any other living creatures on Earth were looking up the sun and shadow of objects to determine the day between night and what time it is, and looking at phases of moon to understand what season it is, what month it is. But it was not until 15,000 BC we get something that is considered as our first calendar, and it actually is a horse. It's a picture of a horse. There are 29 phases of moon below the horse, and that is known as the first calendar, apparently. This was found in some cave in France, and there's nothing earlier that looks like a calendar. So think about it for a second. 13.7 billion years and 4.5 billion years old of Earth, and we are only 200,000 years old, and it was not until 15,000 BC we do something like this. I guess we just didn't care or didn't get there yet. And it was not until 1500 BC we get something like this. As I already mentioned, we were already looking at shadows of objects to determine what time it is, but none of them were portable, and this was considered as first portable clock, if you may. And how it works is this: you just put a bar on it, and the shadow it casts is the time. You have to change its direction at noon so that you get afternoon and forenoon. But the important thing here is it comes with a manual. Incredible. Anyway, you can actually see here 3, 6, 9, and I'm guessing 12. Anyway, so don't see the numbers, but sundials like these were also popular at the time, apparently. But the problem with anything that depends on sun is that you cannot measure time during night. And it only works during days, but it only works during sunny days, actually. So you have to live in a city that is almost always sunny, like California. So, in case you're interested. 750 BC, we finally get, I already mentioned I'm going to skip a lot of things, and I'm probably skipping a lot of Eastern lunar calendars, but this is the first calendar of Rome. We get 10 months starting from March to December, and first 4 months have a special name, and the rest is just 5th month, 6th month, whatever boring names. Every month has 30, 31 days, and in the end, you get 51 days of nothing. It's just 51 days added to years without a month. And that didn't happen every single year, apparently. And people who decide whether they will have an extra 51 days at the end of the year, I read that they abused it to extend office days of whoever's in power. And then they decided to add January and February to the beginning. And apparently some people just said, no, don't do that. We will start the year in March. But yeah, I guess it's like 300 BC on, we get a different type of clock. This is new, water clock, or Greeks call it water thief. It's just water dripping at a constant rate, filling a bucket, and you have lines on bucket showing hours, which is pretty simple. The difference between sun clocks and water clocks is that sun clock actually shows you the position of sun, but this thing just measures intervals. So you can consider this as the first thing towards the way we measure time today. This also had some problems because water would freeze if you're in a city that has below 32 Fahrenheit temperature during nights, unless you're in California. Hourglass was another thing that also measured interval, but they also had some friction problems and some incense and candles as well. But the main problem here is that you have to reset it too often. Otherwise, it would just stop working. 46 BC, we get Julian Calendar, which is exactly the same as the calendar we're using right now, except the leap year rule. So what they had was once in a 4 year, we're going to add a leap day to February. What we have right now is if the year is divisible by 4 and not divisible by 100, unless divisible by 400, which is more precise. And it wasn't a problem at the beginning, but if you use this calendar for 1500 years, you will see a shift in seasons, which they saw and changed it laterwards. I'll get to that. The good thing is, if you're using datetime, you can actually get Julian day and modify Julian day, which is pretty cool. Not sure why you need it, but in 13th century, we finally get some mechanical clocks. So it's super interesting to me. We didn't have any. The only way to measure time until 13th century was, sun and water and whatever. And we get things like this, which are not famous for their accuracy. And they had these built in churches so that they can, ring the bell and whatever. But they had to calibrate it by looking at sun again. 1525, we get this thing invented, and accuracy improves, and we start to see some watches too, but realistic watches, I guess. 1582, we make the change to what we call Gregorian calendar. So those leap days add up to 10 or so days, and we had to just skip it because Julian calendar. One interesting thing is, even though the switch was made in 1500s, it was not. There were still some countries using Julian calendar until 1900s. Not anymore, I guess. 1759, we get this thing called Grasshopper escapement, which is pretty cool invention, and it improves the accuracy. So at this point, accuracy is pretty good. You don't need to adjust your clock every day, at least. And this thing is also good because you can take it to sea, which was not a thing for old watches. And I guess this was the clock that solved the longitude problem, so you can find where you are in the sea, in the ocean, before GPS era, of course. And the time was so accurate, every single town had their own local time. So if you complain about time zones, think about it for a second. These guys running through London, delivering mail, had to run through a bunch of time zones, and those were like 4 minutes off or whatever. 1792, French Revolution clock. This is a decimal clock that people never liked it, I guess. 1849, UK gets a standard time, and 1883, US gets multiple standard times. So it was not until 1883 that we had this thing. 1884, Greenwich is voted to be prime meridian because they had already well-established observatory at the place. 1908, we have the first daylight saving change happen in Canada. Thanks, Canada. And you can see around the equator, nobody actually uses it because you don't really need it. It's sunrise and sunset are pretty much the same throughout the year. But if you don't have it, you can adjust your clocks 1 hour forward to get 1 hour more sunlight in summer, which most people hate. 1927, we get quartz clocks right here. And this improved accuracy completely to like 1 second in a couple years. So you get super accurate clocks now. There's no need to adjust that. 1949, we got first atomic clock, but it takes a couple years for them to make it efficient. And finally, in 1967, we redefined second based on atomic clock. And this is the literal point where we stop looking at sun. 1984, Olson database that keeps track of every single rule change in time zone history, including daylight saving changes, gets started, and it's still maintained. 1998, people, they built this thing called internet time, but I don't really know how I feel about it. Thanks. That's pretty much it. And I mentioned what's time. I don't know what time is it in space, but let me quickly mention that in International Space Station, they're using UTC, which is also the standard time here. And for the question, what time is it in Mars? NASA actually has this software, which is pretty cool. You can actually install it and see what time is it in Mars. And the only difference is a day in Mars takes 24 hours and 30-something minutes. So their seconds are a little bit slower, but still 24 hours. Yeah. Thank you. And I guess Islamic calendar is still based on moon, so you get shifts of 10 days every single year. That's also very similar. That's interesting. That's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah. Any more tubias? Oh. Yeah, that's pretty close. Oh, wow. I I think there's a standard time. I don't know where, but what I understand is that they're using different local times per mission. Thank you.